settle in. Let your breathing slow a little. We're going back roughly 1 million years to a place that still exists today. A long, quiet cave in South Africa called Wonderwork Cave. Everything I'm about to tell you is based on confirmed archaeological findings from this site. No legends, no guesses pretending to be facts, just the quiet story held within the earth. Picture a valley in the northern Cape, dry, wide open, with a light wind brushing over stone. Wonderwork Cave sits at the base of a low hillside, stretching more than 100 meters inward. This is one of the earliest sites on Earth where scientists have found clear signs of controlled fire use by ancient humans. When I say controlled, I don't mean they could create fire from scratch. Evidence for that does not exist at this time. I mean fire they kept alive, tended, and used deliberately. Inside the cave, researchers uncovered thin layers of ash mixed deep into the soil. These layers were not left by wind. They weren't blown in from a distant wildfire. They weren't carried by rain. They were found well inside the cave, far from any sunlight, and far from where a natural wildfire could reach. This is one of the reasons scientists take the evidence so seriously. Along with the ash, archaeologists found tiny burnt bone fragments. Under powerful microscopes, the internal structure of these bones showed clear heat damage. Not the scorching you'd see from a wildfire, but the signature of a slow, controlled burn. Studies published by teams working at Wonderwork confirm this specific heat signature, separating it from natural events. When you put all this together, it becomes one of the most reliable early records of hominin fire use we have. Now, imagine the people who left those traces behind. Homo erectus. They stood tall, walked much like we do, and lived across Africa and parts of Eurasia. Based on the fossil evidence we have, their brains were smaller than ours, but significantly larger than earlier hominins. Their bodies were strong, built for endurance, for covering long distances. Here's the thing, we don't know exactly how they first encountered fire. Maybe lightning struck the dry grasslands outside the cave, leaving a tree smoldering. Maybe they found glowing, brittle branches left behind by a natural burn. What we can say with confidence is that they brought fire into this cave and kept it alive long enough for ash to settle, for bone to char, and for the soil to record the moment for 1 million years. Imagine the inside of that cave. The deep, profound darkness. The deep silence, broken only by the soft crackle of embers. The flickering firelight dancing on ancient stone walls. It didn't matter that they couldn't create fire themselves. What mattered was the patience to protect a flame, to feed it with dry grass or twigs, and to return to it again and again as a source of stability. Researchers believe they probably used fire for warmth. The evidence for cooking isn't absolute here, but the presence of burnt animal bone inside the cave, far from the entrance, strongly suggests they were at least processing their food near the fire. Every interpretation stays grounded in what has actually been found. If you're listening with your eyes closed, just imagine that warm circle of light, the earthy smell of smoke, mingling with the cool, damp air of the cave, the steady, quiet rhythm of early humans gathering around embers they carried carefully from the outside world. At this stage, fire wasn't just a tool yet. It was more like a living companion they were learning to understand, a piece of the wild world they had brought under their care. What this discovery really means for us is simple but profound. The story of our relationship with fire isn't a single dramatic spark of invention. It's a slow, gradual shift in behavior. It's a learning curve that stretched across thousands of generations. Wonderwork Cave gives us a precious snapshot of that long journey, a frozen moment in time where hard evidence, not our modern imagination, does the speaking. As the cave cooled and warmed with each fire, day after day, the soil kept a quiet, meticulous record. Ash settling in thin layers, bones marked with heat scars, and nearby, the stone tools they left behind. These Acheulean tools, the hand axes and flakes, found in the same layers, help archaeologists date the occupation. They also remind us that Homo erectus worked with skill and intent. Their tools were not elaborate, nothing we would call artistic, but they were sharp-edged stones, shaped with clear purpose. When archaeologists sift through the cave's layers today, they do it with incredible slowness and precision. They use advanced methods that can track microscopic particles of ash. Multiple independent studies have confirmed that this ash was from burned plant material, not from bat guano or other natural debris that can sometimes mimic a fire pit. That level of verification is what makes Wonderwork different from so many other, more debated early fire sites. So, as you drift toward rest, hold on to this one verified image, a small group of early humans, deep inside a dark cave, tending a fire they didn't create, but one they learned to keep. The world outside was vast and unpredictable. The nights were cold and filled with unknown sounds. But inside that glowing circle of warmth and light, they shaped a new part of human history. A flame, caught 1 million years ago, and carried forward, one precious ember at a time. We're walking with Homo erectus again, but this time, our focus isn't a cave or a stone tool. It's something much more ephemeral, yet transformative, their slow, patient relationship with fire. When you think of early humans and fire, you probably imagine someone striking two rocks together to create a spark. But for Homo erectus, the story is very different. Based on all the evidence we have, they didn't invent fire-making. We haven't found a single confirmed site from their era with tools designed for creating sparks. What we can say with confidence is that they learned to manage fire long before they knew how to create it from scratch. This is a crucial distinction that researchers always emphasize. Let's paint a picture of their world. Imagine a vast, open savanna. A lightning strike hits dry grass, and a wildfire sweeps across the landscape. Long after the main flames have passed, the ground smolders, embers glow in the charred remains of trees and bushes. Early humans would have seen this happen over and over again. Paleoenvironmental studies confirm that they lived in environments where these natural burns were common. So, the most realistic scenario is that they became scavengers of fire. They learned to collect embers from the aftermath of these natural events. A glowing branch, a still warm stump, a piece of charcoal that could be carried for a short distance before it went cold. Archaeologists call this fire transport. It doesn't sound as dramatic as inventing fire, does it? It's almost humble. But don't underestimate the skill involved. It requires keen awareness, perfect timing, and the ability to protect something incredibly fragile. Think about it. To keep a single ember alive for even an hour, you need to shield it from the wind, constantly feed it with tiny, dry bits of tinder, and never let it go out. This isn't a one-time act. It's a continuous process of care and attention. The archaeological evidence for this is subtle but compelling. At sites like Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, we see signs of controlled fire use dating back about 1 million years. In Israel, at a place called Gesher Banat Yaakov, there's evidence of repeated burning in specific clusters from around 800,000 years ago. Researchers interpret these clusters as hearth-like zones. They aren't the neat, circular fireplaces we might imagine, but distinct patches where burning happened again and again in the same spots. While there's still some debate, these findings are published in top scientific journals and are taken very seriously. What we know for certain is this: traces of fire appear again and again at Homo erectus sites across huge distances and vast stretches of time. We find them in Africa, the Levant, and parts of Asia. This widespread distribution strongly suggests that controlling and maintaining fire wasn't a fluke. It became a fundamental part of their lifestyle. Now, let's try to picture that moment before fire became familiar. A small group of Homo erectus finds a smoldering log. One of them carefully picks up a piece with a red, glowing core. They wrap it in green leaves or damp moss to carry it. As they travel, they have to stop, unwrap their precious cargo, and gently fan it back to life, feeding it with dried grass until a small flame appears. This specific scene is speculative, of course, but the broader behavior long-distance movement, combined with repeated fire traces, points to them carrying fire with them. With this managed flame, their world was transformed. Evenings were no longer just about darkness and danger. Fire provided warmth against the cold night air. It could be used to soften tough meat, making it easier to chew and digest. The smoke kept biting insects at bay, and the light pushed lurking predators just beyond the edge of their camp. We can't know how often they succeeded in keeping a fire alive. Archaeology can't measure that frequency. A sudden rainstorm could extinguish their flame in an instant. A moment of carelessness could let the last ember die, but the evidence shows they kept trying, and they often succeeded. Their brains were growing, their bodies were built for endurance, and now fire added a powerful new layer to their survival toolkit. It created a focal point, a place where the group could gather. They didn't need to understand the chemistry of combustion. They simply understood its immense usefulness. Let's pause and absorb that image. The soft crackling of a small fire. The faces of Homo erectus illuminated in the warm, flickering light. The wind might be howling outside their shelter, but within the circle of light, there is warmth and a measure of safety. Every verified trace of ash and charcoal we find tells us that fire was becoming part of their daily and nightly rhythm. This wasn't a sudden, dramatic discovery. It was a long observation. It was a learning curve shaped by watching the natural world, season after season, generation after generation. They probably lost their fire countless times, but each time they managed to keep a flame alive just a little longer. Their world changed. This patient, quiet relationship with a fragile ember is the real turning point. It's the beginning of a journey that would eventually lead to everything humans would later become. So, as we finish our story for today, hold on to that grounded image, not the dramatic invention of fire, but the quiet, constant care of it. A simple flame, carried forward through time by hands that were learning what it meant to be human. Thanks for joining me on this journey back in time. If you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next adventure. See you next time. Let's journey back in time, following our ancestor, Homo erectus, as they stepped into colder parts of the world. These were places where winter would have been sharp and unforgiving. Everything we'll discuss is grounded in confirmed archaeological evidence and carefully reviewed research. Wherever the science is uncertain, I promise I'll tell you. Let's start with a simple fact. Homo erectus did not stay in the warm tropics. They expanded far beyond them, reaching regions that today include parts of Georgia in the Caucasus, northern China, and even Europe. Sites like DMIC in Georgia are incredibly well documented, dated to about 1.8 million years ago. Finds in northern China, like those in the Niwan Basin, show occupation in environments that were definitely seasonally cold. This raises the big question for researchers. How did they possibly endure those winters? The honest answer is that the evidence is incomplete. We're piecing together a puzzle with many missing parts, but we do know several things with certainty. First, and most importantly, fire mattered. Archaeological sites from the Middle Pleistocene show burnt material, telling us that groups living in these cooler climates were not living entirely without warmth. Now, this is a crucial distinction. There is no proof that they could start a fire from scratch whenever they wanted. It's much more likely that they were masters of controlling and maintaining fire rather than creating it. Think of them as fire keepers, not fire starters. Still, even this limited relationship with fire would have been a lifeline, helping them survive nights that dropped well below tolerable temperatures. Imagine the difference a small, constant flame would make. Second, their bodies were different from earlier hominins. Homo erectus had a more modern body plan. They had longer legs, shorter arms, and a larger torso volume relative to their body mass. This wasn't just a random change. Studies of their fossil limb proportions suggest they were incredibly efficient walkers, able to travel long distances. This mobility would have allowed them to shift their habitats when the seasons changed. In a way, mobility itself may have been a primary survival strategy. If a place became too harsh, they could move on. Now, let's talk about something everyone asks about: clothing. This is a point where archaeology is completely silent. We have found no confirmed clothing, no hide-scraping tools, nothing from Homo erectus that points to tailored garments. This doesn't mean they walked around with absolutely nothing for warmth. It simply means no physical proof has survived the immense span of time. Some researchers propose they may have used simple hides, maybe just draped over themselves, but this remains pure speculation. And because it's speculation, I won't treat it as a fact here. We have to stick to what the evidence tells us. What we do have stronger evidence for is shelter. Several sites show that Homo erectus used natural formations like caves and rock overhangs to their advantage. The famous Acheulean site in China is one example, though the story of fire there is a bit debated. In Europe, sites like Bilzingselbahn show organized living areas, but those belong to later hominins, not Homo erectus. For erectus, the clearest, verified pattern is the use of caves and wind-protected spaces. A natural rock shelter can reduce wind chill significantly, even without any complex construction. It's a simple but highly effective survival tactic. To understand the climates they faced, scientists study environmental data from sediment cores and the fossilized remains of animals found at these sites. This tells us that some of the areas they lived in experienced cold seasons, but not the deep glacial extremes of an ice age. Other places, especially parts of northern China, had much harsher winters. Survival in these varied landscapes would have required a toolkit of adaptations, not one single magic solution. So, let's recap the strategy so far. Fire for warmth. A robust, thick-bodied anatomy for heat retention. The strategic use of natural shelter. And the ability to move when needed. But there's another piece of the puzzle, and it's all about what they ate. The evidence here is very strong. Cut marks on animal bones from multiple sites confirm that Homo erectus consumed meat regularly. Meat is a powerhouse of calories. When you combine that with the possibility of cooked food, which is still debated but plausibly would have been a game changer, easier digestion means more energy is available to the body. This high-calorie diet would have been crucial for generating internal heat and surviving winter far better than a purely plant-based diet ever could. So, let's try to picture it. Imagine a cold landscape just before sunrise. Frost covers the grass. The air is completely still. A small group of Homo erectus is approaching the mouth of a cave. One of them carefully carries glowing embers, protected from the cold in a bundle of leaves or bark. Inside, the cave still holds some of yesterday's warmth. They place the ember gently into a small pile of dry material, coaxing it back into a gentle flame. The scene you picture must stay grounded in what we know. There's no clothing unless we find proof. There are no polished, constructed shelters. It's just a group of resourceful hominins using fire, stone tools, and their own incredible endurance to survive another day. Think of the Niwan Basin in China again. Archaeologists there found stone tools scattered across the ancient margins of a lake. This was a cold, windy zone. These findings show that Homo erectus returned to these places over and over again, even in harsh climates. Their persistence is written in stone, backed by the evidence. They adapted not with a burst of advanced technology, but with strategy, with physical strength, and with the simple, powerful gift of fire. As we finish, hold on to this thought. Homo erectus survived the winter, not through some sudden, brilliant innovation, but through steady, unwavering resilience. Their story is slow, it's patient, it's grounded in endurance, rather than invention. A small fire, a sheltered corner of rock, a body built to walk far, and a determination so strong that it left traces that still speak to us 1,000,000 years later. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey. If you found this fascinating, please consider liking the video and subscribing for more deep dives into our ancient past. See you next time. Close your eyes for a moment. Let your breathing settle and allow the sounds around you to fade. Tonight, we journey back in time, following a single question that has shaped decades of scientific debate. Did Homo erectus actually cook? The short answer is that the evidence is mixed. Some discoveries point toward early cooking, while others show fire use without clear proof of roasting or boiling. I'll walk you through what scientists can confirm and what remains uncertain. Let's start with the basics. Homo erectus, an early human ancestor, lived from roughly 1.9 million years ago to at least 300,000 years ago. Compared to earlier hominins, their bodies were larger and required more energy. Crucially, their brains grew significantly. These biological changes sparked a powerful idea. most famously associated with the anthropologist Richard Wrangham. He proposed the cooking hypothesis, suggesting that cooking food unlocked the extra calories needed to fuel those bigger bodies and more complex brains. This hypothesis is incredibly influential, but it's not universally accepted. So, what does the evidence on the ground tell us? Let's travel to Wonderwork Cave in South Africa. Here, researchers found burned bone and ash dating back about 1 million years. The bones showed heat damage consistent with a controlled fire, suggesting that Homo erectus was processing food near a flame. But here's the catch: processing doesn't automatically equal cooking. They might have simply been burning leftover scraps or using the fire to clean a carcass after butchering. The evidence is tantalizing, but it doesn't offer a clear conclusion. Next, we visit Gesher Banat Yaakov in Israel, a site roughly 800,000 years old. Archaeologists unearthed burnt seeds, charred flint tools, and traces of fire, all clustered together in specific patterns. Some researchers interpret these clusters as the remains of structured hearths, the ancient equivalent of a campfire built for a purpose. If that's true, it would be strong support for cooking. However, not all scholars agree. Others argue the burning could have happened naturally, perhaps from a wildfire, or simply as a result of people occupying the same spot over and over again, rather than deliberate food preparation. So, the debate continues. Another famous case is Acheulean in China. For decades, it was believed to be a key site where Homo erectus lived and cooked around fire. But recent, more advanced analyses have raised serious doubts. It turns out some of the burned materials once attributed to human activity might have been introduced by later geological processes. Other burn marks could have been caused by natural fires. The story that seems so clear in older textbooks is now much more complicated. So, what can we say with confidence? We know for a fact that Homo erectus used fire at multiple sites. They likely gathered around flames for warmth and for protection from predators. We know they butchered animals with stone tools, and fire would have been a natural part of that environment. We consistently find burned bone and charred plant remains in contexts associated with them. These facts are solid. Now, here is where the uncertainty creeps in. No single site has produced direct, undisputed proof of systematic cooking by Homo erectus. We haven't found roasted marrow bones with clear-cut marks and burn patterns that line up perfectly. We haven't found fire pits carefully lined with stones to control heat. And we haven't found any specialized tools for stirring food or placing it on a fire. But at the same time, the lack of perfect proof doesn't completely rule out cooking. Archaeology is a science of what survives by chance. If early cooking was simple, the evidence it left behind might be too subtle to detect after hundreds of thousands of years. Just imagine a piece of meat placed near the edge of a small fire. There was no pottery, no metal pans, and no structured oven. It was just an ember bed and maybe a warm stone. Even if this happened every day, the archaeological signature could be incredibly faint. Bones might break apart over time, residues might wash away, and ash layers could get mixed with later sediments. So, the most honest position is this: cooking by Homo erectus is possible, and is indirectly supported by their biological changes. But the direct archaeological evidence remains limited and heavily debated. Some experts lean toward a yes, while others remain cautious. Both positions are based on data and rigorous analysis, not just imagination. For your own mind's quiet, picture a simple scene that stays within the bounds of what we know. A group of early humans sits around a fire as dusk settles. A cracked bone nearby shows signs of being heated. A few seeds lie charred in the soil. The fire flickers, casting dancing shadows on their faces. Whether they were cooking their meal intentionally or just warming food accidentally is still a mystery. But what is clear is that fire and food often met in their daily lives. As you drift deeper into rest, hold onto this grounded truth. Fire fundamentally changed how Homo erectus lived. Whether it also changed how they ate is likely, but not yet fully proven. The story is still unfolding as new research continues to shed light on our ancient past. A slow flame, a quiet evening, and a mystery carried forward through a million years of human history. Thanks for joining me on this journey. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into our shared past. Let your breathing settle. Let your shoulders drop a little. Tonight, we're not just going to talk about history. We're going to drift back in time and sit in on one of the most human moments in our deep, deep past, an early evening around a fire. Everything I'm about to describe isn't just some campfire story I made up. It's all tied to real archaeological evidence, or to very cautious interpretations that are supported by multiple scientific studies. So, let's begin with a simple, powerful truth. Fire completely changed the rhythm of hominin life. Imagine this. Even before our ancestors, like Homo erectus, figured out how to create fire from scratch, they understood what it could do for them. They knew its power. At archaeological sites that have been verified beyond any doubt, places like Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, Gesher Banat Yaakov in Israel, and several others scattered across Africa and Eurasia, find undeniable proof. Scientists have dug through layers of earth and found ash, scorched animal bones, and burned debris, all showing that fire was used repeatedly right where these early humans lived. But what does that really mean for their daily lives? Well, it means that fire allowed them to stretch the day. Without it, as soon as the sun went down, darkness would have completely taken over. All activity would have just stopped. But with a fire, they had a source of light. This light meant they could continue to gather, to talk in whatever early form of communication they used, to prepare their food, and, crucially, to observe the night from a position of safety. Now, let's paint a picture. Imagine yourself on the edge of a vast grassland about 1,000,000 years ago. The sun has just disappeared below the horizon. The sky is fading from orange and pink into a deep, dark blue. A small group of early humans is sitting around a collection of burning branches. They didn't make this fire themselves. They carefully carried it from a natural wildfire that might have been started by lightning earlier in the day. The fire crackles softly. Tiny sparks rise up like little stars, dance for a moment, and then vanish into the twilight. This scene isn't just a fantasy. It's grounded in what we know. The evidence tells us that early humans were experts at keeping embers alive. They would protect them, carry them, and use them over and over. Fire was a precious resource, something worth guarding. Archaeologists who study the behavior of these ancient groups don't just look for ash and burned bones. They also look at the patterns of stone tool debris. It's like being a detective. At some sites, they find that a huge number of discarded stone flakes and tools are clustered in areas that perfectly align with where the traces of fire appear. This strongly suggests that when a fire was present, a lot of work happened right next to it. It makes perfect sense, right? The light helped them see what they were doing. They could butcher an animal they had hunted, or prepare plant material for eating without having to race against the setting sun. Now, was this a time for storytelling in the way we think of it today? Probably not. We have no evidence of complex language or epic sagas being shared. But gathering around a fire almost certainly encouraged social interaction. Fire does something fundamental. It reduces fear. It creates a shared, safe space. It pulls people together. Researchers who study modern hunter-gatherer groups today often note how the fire naturally becomes the social center of the camp. It's where people gather, share information, and strengthen their bonds. While we can't just project modern behavior directly onto Homo erectus a million years ago, the basic, primal pull of warmth and light is universal. It's in our DNA. Another confirmed benefit, and this one is huge, was protection. Most predators instinctively avoid flames. Studies of modern carnivore behavior show that fire is an excellent deterrent for large cats and scavengers, like hyenas. Think about the ancient landscapes our ancestors roamed. They were filled with saber-toothed cats, giant hyenas, and other threats that were much bigger and scarier than what we have today. In that world, even a small, flickering fire would create a bubble of safety. It was like a force field against the dangers of the night. At some archaeological sites, we find fire pits right next to butchered animal bones. This hints that these groups could process their prey without having to constantly look over their shoulders, worried that a scavenger was about to rush in and steal their hard-earned meal. Now, let's get practical. Picture the scene again. Someone carefully feeds a few dry twigs into the flames to keep them going. Someone else brings over a larger branch they had collected earlier in the day. These weren't fire masters in the way we might think. They weren't rubbing sticks together or striking flint. They were opportunists. They were caretakers. But they understood enough to keep the fire alive. The most compelling evidence for this is simple but profound. Repeated burned layers across multiple occupations of the same site. You just unget that kind of pattern, unless groups are returning to these fires again and again, or successfully keeping them going for long periods. And let's not forget about the simple comfort of warmth. The warmth from a fire made cold evenings bearable. Studies of ancient climates in places like the Naiwan Basin in China show that some of the regions inhabited by Homo erectus were surprisingly cool or even downright cold during certain seasons. A fire would have dramatically eased the stress on their bodies, lowering the amount of energy they needed to just stay warm. This fits perfectly with the fossil record, which shows that our ancestors managed to live successfully in these challenging environments for thousands of years. The fire gave them an edge. So, think of the flicker of that light inside a dark cave. Imagine the shadows dancing on the stone walls. You see the glint of bone fragments on the ground, the little stone flakes left over from someone shaping a new tool. The heat of the fire gently pushes back the immense darkness of the prehistoric night. None of this is invented. These are the actual remnants that archaeologists find. This is the scene they reconstruct from the clues left behind. One final thing to keep in mind is that Homo erectus likely lost their fire, and lost it often. Without a reliable method to ignite flames on demand, they were completely dependent on keeping embers alive from one day to the next, or getting lucky and finding a new natural fire. So, you can imagine that every single evening when a flame survived, it was a moment of profound relief. It meant safety. It meant warmth. It meant another small but crucial victory against the elements. So as you get ready to drift off, just hold on to that simplest, verified image, a small circle of early humans, our distant relatives, sitting close to a glow that is both fragile and incredibly powerful. Their faces are lit by the warm light. Their tools are nearby, ready for the morning. The vast, dangerous night is held at a safe distance. This isn't a story of some grand invention. It's a story of patience, of observation, and of adaptation. The fire burns softly. The world quiets down around them, and time moves slowly, inexorably forward, one precious ember at a time. Thanks for joining me on this journey back. Be sure to subscribe for more explorations into our incredible past. Tonight, let us follow one of the greatest journeys in human prehistory, the movement of Homo erectus out of Africa. Every part of this story is grounded in real archaeological sites and peer-reviewed science. And wherever the evidence gets a bit hazy, I'll be sure to tell you. Let's start with what we know for sure. The earliest widely accepted fossils of Homo erectus come from East Africa. Sites like Kubifora in Kenya and Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania show they were living there more than 1.5 million years ago. Their bodies were already surprisingly similar to ours in height and limb proportions. They had strong legs, a long stride, and were built for covering distance. This physical design is one of the clearest reasons they were able to expand so far beyond their original home. One of the most important sites outside of Africa is Dmanisi, in the country of Georgia. The fossils discovered there are about 1.8 million years old, and they represent the earliest solid proof of our ancient relatives living outside the African continent. These incredible remains include skulls, jaws, and simple stone tools. What's fascinating is that in the earliest layers, archaeologists found no traces of fire. This tells us that the very first expansions out of Africa didn't depend on the control of fire, a key point that multiple studies now support. From Dmanisi, we start to see a pattern that repeats itself across Eurasia. Small groups of Homo erectus moved along river valleys, open grasslands, and coastal plains. Their expansion was slow but incredibly steady. Archaeologists describe this process as a dispersal rather than a migration. There was no single great leap, no sudden dramatic event. It was simply generation after generation exploring a little bit further into new land. Now, let's turn our gaze toward Asia. Fossils found in Java, Indonesia, show that Homo erectus had reached Southeast Asia by at least 1.5 million years ago. Famous sites like Sangiran and Trinel contain well-documented remains that confirm their presence. How exactly they crossed the region isn't fully understood, because some areas would have required them to get past significant water barriers. But we have to remember that during the Pleistocene ice ages, sea levels were often much lower than they are today, exposing land bridges that connected what are now islands. This makes their route plausible without needing boats. And it's important to note there's no confirmed evidence that they ever built watercraft. Moving over to China, sites like Yuanmu, Gongwangling, and the later, very famous site of Acheulean show that Homo erectus lived across huge areas of East Asia. The dates vary from site to site, but the overall pattern is consistent. We find their stone tools and fossils in geological layers that correspond to climates ranging from temperate all the way to cold. This is powerful evidence showing just how adaptable they were. They weren't just following warm, tropical paths. They were able to survive and thrive in a variety of different environments. So, what does all of this really mean? It's actually quite simple. Their incredible spread across the globe was not driven by advanced technology. They didn't have sophisticated tools. They didn't build complex shelters. And as we saw, they didn't even have fire-making skills at the beginning. They moved because their bodies allowed them to. They were endurance walkers, capable of covering long distances efficiently. They had flexible diets, able to live on whatever plants and animals they could find, and they could survive in open landscapes with limited cover. Every one of these traits is verified in the fossil record. When archaeologists study their dispersal, they often look at animal remains and ancient environmental data. It turns out that many of the regions Homo erectus entered had large grazing animals and open habitats very similar to the African savannas they came from. This familiarity would have helped them adapt more easily. They weren't stepping into completely alien ecosystems. They were finding places with recognizable patterns, herds of animals, vast grasslands, seasonal water sources, and scattered trees. Now, just for a moment, imagine the journey itself, the sound of feet on dry soil, the slow, unhurried movement of a small family group following a river. There was no rush. There was no final destination in mind. It was just the natural flow of life, expanding outward. The fossil evidence strongly supports this idea of a gradual, almost aimless movement rather than some kind of organized, purposeful travel. Picture them arriving in new landscapes, a fresh valley stretching out before them, a different horizon, the feeling of colder mornings on their skin, new types of prey animals to hunt, new sources of stone to flake into tools. Every campsite they left behind created a thin, almost invisible layer of stone flakes, animal bones, and maybe, eventually, ash. Most of it vanished with time, washed away by rain and wind. But a precious few places endured, preserved long enough to be uncovered by scientists, telling us this incredible story. This is where the story becomes quiet and almost meditative. Their expansion wasn't dramatic or heroic in the way we might imagine. It was patient. It was a rhythm of walking, resting, gathering, hunting, raising children, and then moving on again. Over thousands upon thousands of years, this slow, steady rhythm carried them across entire continents. So, as we finish, I want you to hold on to what the evidence truly shows. Homo erectus became the first hominin species to live across Africa, Asia, and parts of Europe. They achieved this not because they were brilliant inventors or master toolmakers, but because they were steady, enduring, and fundamentally adaptable. Their footprints stretched farther than any species before them, laid down one step at a time, one generation after another. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you enjoyed this, please consider liking the video and subscribing for more stories from our deep past. See you next time. Tonight, we're journeying back in time over 1,000,000 years to understand the everyday work of survival for one of our most successful ancestors. Homo erectus. How did they find food? What did they eat? Everything we'll discuss is tied directly to real archaeological evidence from sites across Africa, Asia, and Europe. Let's start with the most important fact. Homo erectus was an omnivore. We know this from several lines of evidence: cut marks on animal bones, detailed studies of their toothwear, and the presence of stone tools found right alongside animal remains in butchery areas. They ate what their environment provided: meat, plants, fruits, and roots. This flexibility was the absolute key to their survival, and the archaeological record confirms it time and time again. So, let's talk about the meat. There is strong evidence that Homo erectus hunted or scavenged medium and large animals. At famous sites like Acheulean in Kenya, we've found animal bones with deliberate cut marks. These aren't random scratches. They run across muscle attachment points, which tells us that meat was being systematically removed with stone tools. Some of these sites contain huge concentrations of bones and tools, suggesting they were returned to repeatedly over long periods for processing. However, here is a crucial detail that researchers agree on. Homo erectus likely combined hunting and scavenging. They didn't rely on just one strategy. There is no clear evidence that they were bringing down massive animals with advanced weapons. Why? Because their tools were simple. They used hand axes, sharp flakes, and choppers. These were incredibly effective for cutting and butchering, but they weren't designed for throwing or piercing from a distance. So, the idea of a direct confrontational hunt against a giant mammoth is probably not accurate. Instead, it's more likely they targeted smaller, more manageable game, or perhaps drove animals into natural traps like swamps or ravines. They were also brilliant opportunists. They almost certainly took advantage of carcasses left by large predators like saber-toothed cats, arriving early enough to claim the best meat before other scavengers like hyenas showed up. Stable isotope studies on their fossilized teeth, though limited, also point to a significant portion of their diet coming from animal sources. This fits perfectly with what we see in the cut-marked bones and the tool-littered butchery sites. Let's try to picture what a hunt might have looked like. Imagine a small group moving quietly through the tall grasses of the savanna. They're watching a small antelope, or maybe a young animal that has become separated from its herd. They have no spears, no bows and arrows. Their greatest weapons are timing, teamwork, and incredible endurance. Their physical build totally supports this idea. With long legs, strong joints, and an efficient system for regulating body heat, they could pursue prey over very long distances. Some researchers have proposed a method called persistence hunting, where a hunter or group would essentially run an animal to exhaustion by following it relentlessly in the midday heat until it collapsed. While we don't have direct proof that Homo erectus did this, their anatomy makes it a very plausible strategy. It's a powerful image, a testament to human endurance. But since the evidence isn't conclusive, we should consider it a cautious possibility rather than a confirmed fact. Now, what about the other side of their diet? Gathering was just as important as hunting, if not more so. Plant foods don't preserve well in the archaeological record, which makes them harder to study. But at some sites, we've found grinding stones and microscopic plant remains called phytoliths, which suggest they were processing roots, tubers, and seeds. In tropical regions, fruits and other seasonal plants would have been abundant and easy to find. Their day-to-day gathering likely focused on predictable, reliable resources, things like edible leaves, nuts, berries, and those starchy, energy-rich tubers buried underground. When they had access to fire, it probably made many of these plant foods safer and easier to digest. We know they used fire frequently and processed food near it, even though the direct evidence for widespread cooking is still a topic of debate among archaeologists. So, let's paint another picture. Imagine it's late afternoon on the savannah. A group spreads out, searching for the telltale signs of tubers hidden just beneath the soil. They're using simple digging sticks or stones, relying on generations of knowledge passed down to identify the right plants. The archaeological record clearly shows that Homo erectus had an intimate knowledge of their landscapes. They knew where to find water, they understood the seasonal cycles of plants, and they returned to the same resource-rich locations again and again. Their repeated presence at sites like Lake Turkana shows just how central these life-giving environments were to their survival. And what about coastal areas? At some sites, in places like Eritrea and even Indonesia, there's evidence that early hominins were eating shellfish. It's a bit tricky because at some of these locations, it's not entirely clear if the remains belong to Homo erectus or another hominin species. So, while shoreline foraging is a possibility, we should treat it as uncertain for Homo erectus specifically until we have more definitive proof. What all of this evidence confirms, without a doubt, is that they were strategic. They were not reckless. They timed their movements to coincide with animal migrations. They established their home bases near lakes, rivers, and wetlands, where food and water were reliable. The fossil sites tell this story loud and clear. Think of those quiet moments. A group sitting around a recently butchered animal, the sound of stone being struck against stone, flaking off razor-sharp edges, the focused work of scraping meat from bone. This isn't an imagined scene. It's directly supported by the thousands of cut marks and scattered tools we've unearthed. Life was not always easy. Food wasn't abundant everywhere, and they certainly faced times of scarcity. But their incredible endurance, their mobility, and their varied, flexible diet allowed them to thrive across more habitats than any hominin that came before them. As we finish our journey tonight, hold on to this thought. Homo erectus survived for more than 1.5 million years because they knew how to read the land. They hunted when they could. They scavenged when they needed to. They gathered what nature offered. They repeated this rhythm of life for an almost unimaginable length of time. Their survival wasn't luck. It was the result of steady, patient, and successful adaptation. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into our ancient past. If you found this interesting, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration. See you next time. Tonight, we're going to explore something simple but absolutely fundamental. Where did Homo erectus sleep? Where did they find rest and protection from the dangers of the ancient world? Every detail in this journey is grounded in solid archaeological evidence. If something is uncertain, I'll be sure to point it out. Let's start with the most consistent pattern we see in the archaeological record. Homo erectus frequently used natural shelters, caves, rock overhangs, and spaces protected from the wind appear again and again. One of the most famous examples is the Acheulean cave system in China. While the evidence for controlled fire there is still debated, what's undeniable is that hominin remains and their stone tools were discovered deep inside those caves. We don't know for sure if they lived there year-round or just visited seasonally, but we know they were there. Their presence is real, etched into the layers of the earth. In Africa, the story is slightly different. Many sites reveal that Homo erectus preferred to live near riverbanks and lakeshores. At places like Kubifora in Kenya, archaeologists have unearthed stone tools and animal bones scattered across open ground. There are no signs of preserved shelters, but the way these artifacts are arranged suggests a deliberate choice. They selected open areas that offered good visibility and easy access to water, rather than enclosed spaces. In fact, for the early African record, these open-air sites are far more common than caves. Now, let's travel to Eurasia, in Georgia, where the incredible Dmanisi fossils were discovered. The landscape was dotted with natural depressions, shallow rock shelters, and volcanic outcrops. The fossils themselves were found in sediments near the entrance of a natural cavity. This suggests that these early human groups used such features as temporary refuges or as places to process their food. They weren't permanent homes, but they were practical, useful spots in a vast landscape. Here is a really crucial point. Archaeologists have never found any definitive evidence of built structures from this period. There are no confirmed huts, no arranged wooden frames, no post holes in the ground. This strongly implies that Homo erectus relied almost entirely on what nature provided. It's possible they created very simple windbreaks from branches or leaves, but such light shelters would have completely disappeared over hundreds of thousands of years. So, the absence of evidence doesn't mean they never built anything. It just means we have no surviving proof. In colder regions, finding natural shelter became even more critical for survival. Take the Naiwan Basin in northern China, an area that experienced harsh, cold seasons. Stone tools found in the geological layers there show that Homo erectus returned to this location again and again over millennia. Caves, cliff edges, and embankments would have been essential for blocking the biting winter winds. Furthermore, the discovery of fire traces at some mid-Pleistocene sites, like those in the Levant, suggests that warmth came not just from walls, but from the hearth itself. Let's try to picture the evening landscape. Imagine a rocky outcrop forming a shallow alcove, a vast grassland. A few stone tools are scattered near the entrance, and the light from a small fire flickers across the stone face. This is the kind of scene that matches what archaeologists actually find: simple, practical, and shaped by the land itself. The way stone tool debris is arranged also gives us important clues. At some sites, researchers have noticed distinct clusters of stone flakes and animal bones in specific spots, protected from the wind. This suggests that early groups chose these sheltered zones to butcher animals or to sit and shape their tools. They weren't building houses, but they were intelligently choosing safe and comfortable places to rest and work. Now, let's slow down and imagine them inside a cave. It's not decorated or neatly organized. It's just a quiet chamber with a floor of dust and scattered stones. In a place like Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, deep inside the darkness, layers of ancient ash show that hominins used this space repeatedly over a very long time. The warmth of a fire would have filled the still air, and the sounds of the world outside would have faded away. They weren't completely safe from predators, of course, but the combination of fire and solid stone walls offered a significant degree of protection. Their shelter choices also tell us something about their social life. Since no permanent structures have ever been found, it's very likely their groups were highly mobile. They didn't stay in one place long enough to establish villages. Instead, they moved with the seasons, following sources of water and herds of prey. This nomadic lifestyle is consistent with how their fossils and tools are distributed across enormous regions of the Old World. Let your mind settle into this simple, ancient rhythm. The daytime was for walking, searching, and gathering. The evening was for finding a quiet, sheltered place. Fire, when they had it, provided warmth inside a cave or next to a protective rock wall. There was nothing elaborate, it was just enough to survive. The archaeological record paints a picture that is both honest and grounded. Homo erectus created no lasting architecture, but they chose their shelters with care and intelligence. They knew how to read the landscape, how to find a barrier against the wind, and how to settle near water without attracting too many dangerous predators. As we finish, let this scene settle in your mind. A small group sits near the wall of a cave. The fire is burning low. The night outside is cold, but the stone around them holds the day's warmth. Their tools, the key to their survival, rest on the ground beside them. The world is quiet, and for this moment, in this simple shelter, they are safe. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this fascinating, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more explorations into our deep past. See you next time. Tonight's journey is a little different. We're stepping away from the solid ground of what we know and venturing into the quiet, shadowy spaces of history, the places where archaeology falls silent. Because understanding what we don't know is just as crucial as celebrating what we do. And tonight, we're exploring the great unknowns of one of our most resilient ancestors. Homo erectus, Let's start with the biggest question of all, fire. How did Homo erectus first learn to control it? We find tantalizing clues scattered across ancient sites: burned animal bones, layers of ash, soil baked by controlled heat. But the how remains a complete mystery. We don't have the first spark. No fire-starting tools from their earliest days have ever been found. No definitive hearths from that initial period. We only see the aftermath, the evidence that appears long after that first world-changing encounter with flame must have happened. So, the moment of discovery, the origin of humanity's relationship with fire, remains lost in time. And that leads us to another open question. How much did they actually cook? Many researchers believe that cooking was a game changer, that it fundamentally altered their biology and evolution. But when you look for hard proof, the picture gets blurry. There are sites like Gesher, Banat Yaakov in Israel, where burned materials suggest possible cooking, but the evidence is debated. Other early claims, like some from sites in China, have been re-evaluated and are no longer seen as strong evidence. The truth is, we just don't know for sure how central cooking was to their daily lives. What about their homes? Where did they lay their heads at night? We know they used caves and natural rock shelters as bases. We find their tools and butchered animal bones in these places. But what we don't find are any signs of constructed homes. Nothing like a hut, no post holes, no rings of stones that might have anchored a tent. It's entirely possible they built simple shelters from branches and hides that just rotted away, leaving no trace for us to find. But because nothing survived in the archaeological record, we can't confirm it. This is one of the quietest, most frustrating gaps in their story. Then there's the mystery of their social lives. How did they interact with each other? Did they care for the sick or injured? Did they have leaders? Did they work together in complex ways? We get faint hints. In DMOC, Georgia, archaeologists found the skull of an older individual who had lost all their teeth long before death. How did they survive? It would have been incredibly difficult to eat without help. Some researchers see this as compelling evidence for group care, for compassion, but it's an interpretation, not proof. We have no direct evidence of their social roles, their family structures, or how they cooperated beyond the clues left by shared tools and living sites. And what about language? Could they speak? What did their voices sound like as they gathered around a fire? This is one of the most profound unknowns. Looking at their fossils, their brains were significantly larger than earlier hominins, suggesting more complex cognitive abilities. But their vocal anatomy, the key to speech, can't be fully reconstructed from bones alone. Some scientists argue they must have had a simple proto-language to coordinate hunts and pass on tool-making skills. Others believe their communication was far more limited, perhaps more like other great apes. There is no conclusive evidence either way. The honest answer is, we simply don't know. Clothing is another complete blank space. Homo erectus lived in regions that experienced cold winters, so they must have had some way to stay warm. But we have found no preserved tools clearly used for preparing hides from their oldest periods. No needles, no awls, no scraps of leather. We see evidence that they survived the cold, but how they did it, whether with simple cloaks or more complex coverings, is a total mystery. Even their final chapter is shrouded in uncertainty. Homo erectus was one of the most successful hominins in history, surviving for well over 1 million years across vast continents. So why did they disappear? There are plenty of theories. Perhaps it was dramatic climate shifts they couldn't adapt to. Maybe it was competition from newer, more advanced hominins like Neanderthals or our own species. Or perhaps it was a slow, gradual decline over thousands of years. All are possible, but none are proven. Their long reign ended not with a bang, but with a quiet fading from the fossil record. So, imagine the archaeological record as a vast landscape. Some areas are brightly lit by evidently sharp edges of a hand axe, the unmistakable char on a bone, a fossilized skull with a clear date. But much of the landscape fades into deep shadow. Clothing, language, family life, rituals, emotional bonds, these things remain silent. And here's something to remember. Archaeology works with what survives. Stone survives. Bone and teeth sometimes survive. Traces of fire sometimes survive. But most of life doesn't fossilize. The sound of a voice, the shape of a shelter made from branches, the way a parent comforted a child, the stories told in the firelight, if stories even existed, all of it disappeared into the earth without a trace. As we end our journey tonight, let's hold on to the humility of this chapter. We know enough to see Homo erectus, as strong, adaptable, and incredibly enduring. But we don't know enough to understand the fullness of their lives. Their world is half evidence, half silence. And sometimes, that silence is the most profound part of the story, a quiet space stretching across 1,000,000 years, reminding us that deep time is larger and more mysterious than anything we can ever hope to fully reconstruct. Thanks for joining me in exploring the shadows of the past. If you found this journey thought-provoking, consider subscribing for more deep dives into our shared history. Good night. Tonight, we're going on a journey back in time to one of the most famous places linked with our ancient relatives, Acheulean, in northern China. This isn't a simple story. It's long, complicated, and filled with incredible discoveries and intense scientific debates. Everything you'll hear is based on what researchers have confirmed, and where there's still mystery, I'll tell you straight up. So, picture this, a large limestone hill just outside of modern-day Beijing. Deep inside this hill is a whole network of caves and hidden tunnels. It was here, in the early 20th century, that scientists began digging and found something extraordinary. Fossils of an ancient human population we now call Peking man. These fossils are classified as Homo erectus. Thanks to modern dating techniques like radiometric and paleomagnetic methods, we know they lived here somewhere between 700,000 and 400,000 years ago. That's an almost unimaginable stretch of time. What makes Acheulean so important isn't just the sheer number of fossils, but the fact that they were found alongside stone tools and what looked like evidence of fire. When these discoveries were first made, the excavators were convinced they had found a prehistoric home. They described layers of ash, burned bones, and charcoal, painting a picture of Homo erectus gathering around a crackling fire. For decades, this was held up as the best evidence that early humans had mastered fire. But this is where the story gets a lot more interesting. More recent studies have taken a second look at all that evidence. Scientists re-examined the cave sediments and came to a surprising conclusion. They found that some of what was once thought to be ash might have just been natural sediment washed into the cave over time, and those burned bones. They could have been scorched by a natural wildfire on the landscape, and then carried into the cave later by animals or flowing water. Now, this doesn't mean that Homo erectus never used fire at Acheulean. It just means the evidence isn't the slam dunk everyone once thought it was. Today, researchers are still divided. Some argue that there's still enough good evidence to support the idea of controlled fire. Others say it's just too inconclusive. And this is a perfect example of how science works. It's okay to admit when we're not 100% sure. Honest uncertainty is a key part of the process. So let's focus on what we are certain about. Acheulean has given us a massive collection of Homo erectus fossils. From multiple individuals of different ages, children, teenagers, and adults. Their skulls show all the classic features of the species: thick cranial bones, a prominent brow ridge, and a long, low brain case. By studying the wear and tear on their teeth, we know they likely ate a varied diet. And then there are the tools. Thousands of simple stone tools, mostly flakes and choppers, made from local quartz, were found in the very same layers as the fossils. This is solid proof that the cave was used again and again for tasks like processing food or materials. We don't know if they lived here year-round or just visited seasonally, but we know they kept coming back for a very, very long time. It's easy to see why the cave was so attractive. It offered natural shelter from the biting winds. it would have been cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter. Plus, it gave them a great vantage point to look out over the surrounding landscape to spot resources or potential dangers. During this period, known as the Middle Pleistocene, the climate around Beijing was constantly changing, swinging between intensely cold and relatively warm periods. The sediment layers in the cave reflect this. We find bones from animals adapted to cold, like certain types of deer, right alongside animals that preferred warmer climates. This tells us that Homo erectus was incredibly resilient, surviving and thriving through these dramatic environmental shifts. Let's try to imagine it. A quiet evening in the cave. Stone tools are scattered near a natural ledge. The remains of a recent meal, perhaps some animal bones, are piled nearby. The last light of day filters in through the cave entrance before fading into darkness. The sounds of the outside world, the wind, distant animal calls echo faintly within the stone walls. This scene is built only on what we can confirm, a natural refuge that early humans used repeatedly, a place where they made tools and processed food. But there's a tragic twist to the Acheulean story. One of the most heartbreaking parts is the loss of many of the original, priceless fossils. During World War II, the fossils were being prepared for transport out of China to be kept safe. But somewhere on the journey, the crates containing these irreplaceable treasures vanished. To this day, no one knows what happened to them. Their fate remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in archaeology. Fortunately, what we do have are high-quality casts that were made before the fossils disappeared, as well as new fossils that have been discovered in more recent excavations. So even with this incredible loss, Acheulean still stands as one of the most important Homo erectus sites on the planet. The evidence that remains paints a vivid picture of these early humans. They were survivors who endured harsh winters, adapted to a constantly changing world, and used the landscape and its natural shelters wisely. Fire might have been part of their story, but we just can't be sure how big a part it played. The real story of Acheulean is one of layers of sediment, layers of time, and layers of scientific understanding. It doesn't give us simple, clean answers. Instead, it offers us a rich tapestry of possibilities. It's a place where the past doesn't shout at you, it whispers. Let that quiet settle in for a moment. Imagine the cave in total darkness, silent and still. The story of what happened here is still unfolding, one careful excavation, one new discovery at a time. Thanks for joining me on this journey into our deep past. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next adventure. See you next time. Tonight, let's travel back in time, far beyond any human memory, to the winter worlds that Homo erectus walked through. Everything we'll explore tonight is real, grounded in solid scientific evidence from geological studies, fossilized plants and animals, sediment cores, and climate reconstructions. Nothing here is imagined. And where the evidence is incomplete, I'll be sure to tell you. Let's begin by picturing a world far older than any story ever told. Imagine vast, open plains. The wind sweeps over frozen soil. Rivers run slowly, their surfaces shimmering with a thin layer of ice. The sunlight hangs low on the horizon, casting long, pale shadows. These aren't fantasy landscapes. These scenes come directly from places where the fossils and tools of Homo erectus have been found, locked in ancient, cold-season environments. One of the clearest windows into this past is the Niwan Basin in northern China. This area is a treasure trove of ancient lake sediments that have perfectly preserved a record of the climate from the early to middle Pleistocene. When scientists study the pollen, the animal bones, and the layers of earth, they see a climate that swung dramatically between warmer periods and sharp, cold winters. And yet, stone tools appear again and again throughout these layers. This is powerful confirmation that Homo erectus kept returning to this region even when the winter conditions were harsh and unforgiving. Another incredibly important site is Dmanisi in the country of Georgia. Geological evidence from this location shows an environment with cool seasons and frequent frost. The animal fossils discovered alongside the hominin remains belong to species adapted to mixed woodlands, an open steppe habitat that definitely experienced cold spells. The winters here wouldn't have been as extreme as the deep glacial periods in Europe, but they were certainly cold enough to demand adaptation. The fact that Homo erectus was living here nearly 1.8 million years ago is a testament to their resilience. Cold alone was not enough to stop them. Now, let's return our thoughts to northern China. Sites like Zhaokudian, famous for Peking Man, and Gong Wangling reveal a cast of animal characters that tell a story of colder climates. We find deer species adapted to significant seasonal temperature shifts, rodents that thrived in cooler habitats, and carnivores that roamed across cold terrains. These animals tell us so much more about the environment than the soil alone ever could. Their presence gives researchers confidence that the winters here could be severe at times. So, the big question is, how did they do it? How did Homo erectus survive in such challenging conditions? The first part of the answer lies in their mobility. Their bodies were masterpieces of engineering built for long distance, walking and running. We know this from the proportions of their limbs, the shape of their joints, and the telltale marks on their fossilized bones where muscles once attached. This incredible endurance meant they could move to lower elevations or find sheltered valleys during the peak of the cold. While we don't know for sure if they had organized seasonal migrations, their anatomy certainly gave them the option. The second key to their survival was fire. Now, whether they could create fire from scratch is still unproven for this early period, but we have firm evidence that they used it. At several mid-Pleistocene sites, archaeologists have found burnt bone and layers of ash. In a cold environment, even occasional access to a fire, perhaps carried from a natural source, like a lightning strike, would have made a monumental difference. Imagine the comfort and safety it would have provided, especially through the long, dark nights. Third, they were masters of finding natural shelter. Caves, rock overhangs, and wind-protected alcoves often appear in close association with Homo erectus fossils in China and across Eurasia. These natural features would have been a crucial shield against biting winds and frigid air. To date, no confirmed built structures from this period have been found. So their clever use of the natural landscape remains the strongest evidence of their shelter strategy. But there's a big piece of the puzzle that remains a mystery: clothing. As of now, no direct proof exists that Homo erectus used animal hides for warmth. We haven't found scraping tools that are specific to hide preparation from their earliest periods. This gap in our knowledge is a hot topic in research, but the only honest answer is that we simply cannot confirm they wore clothes. Of course, If they used hides in a simple way, perhaps just draping them, those materials would have decayed and disappeared over hundreds of thousands of years. So, the absence of evidence isn't necessarily evidence of absence. It is, for now, just silence in the archaeological record. Now, I want you to picture one specific winter setting, one that is verified by the evidence. Imagine a wide, sweeping plain near an ancient lake. Animal tracks crisscross the frozen ground. A small group of early humans is walking slowly along the riverbank. They stay close to the water because rivers create slightly warmer microclimates, a subtle but important advantage. Their footprints mark their path for a moment before the wind erases them. They are moving toward a low cliff where the dark opening of a shallow cave offers refuge. Inside, the air is still and calm. The ground is dry. Near the entrance, you can see sharp stone flakes scattered about, leftovers from earlier toolmaking sessions. This is exactly the kind of site that archaeologists unearth, simple but incredibly strategic. Climate data from sediment core drilled in this very region show clear cycles of cooling and warming. During the cold phases, the forests would retreat and vast grasslands would expand. Homo erectus followed these environmental shifts, tracking the great herds of animals and the seasonal availability of plants. They were not trapped by winter. They were dynamic participants in its rhythm. They adapted. Let yourself sink into the profound quiet of that ancient world. The cold is piercingly real, but so is their endurance. The wind howls across the open land, but inside the cave, its sound is softened to a murmur. Perhaps a small fire glows in the center, a precious flame they carried with them. If not, they huddle close together, sharing the warmth of their bodies, their backs against the cold, solid stone. Nothing I've described here is imagined beyond what the scientific evidence firmly supports. And as you hold onto this grounded truth, let it guide you deeper into rest. Homo erectus survived winter, not primarily through complex invention, but through sheer resilience. Their powerful bodies, their remarkable mobility, their careful choice of shelter, and their growing relationship with fire helped them withstand climates far harsher than those faced by any hominins before them. These cold, formidable landscapes did not defeat them. They crossed them, slowly, patiently, one determined step at a time. And the trail they blazed stretches across continents. A story written into the very earth by frost, wind, and the deep passage of time. Thank you for joining me on this journey tonight. If you enjoyed this exploration, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories from our deep past. Sleep well. Tonight, we're going to journey back in time, about 1 million years ago, to explore a fundamental shift in human history, the relationship between our ancestors, Homo erectus, and fire. Specifically, we'll look at how the growing use of fire started to change the way they ate. Everything we'll discuss is grounded in archaeological evidence, biological studies, and peer-reviewed research. I'll be very clear about what we know for sure and what's still a fascinating puzzle for scientists. First, let's establish a baseline. What did Homo erectus eat before fire became a regular part of their lives? They were resourceful omnivores. Their diet was a mix of whatever their environment provided: meat, plants, roots, fruits. We know this from solid evidence. Cut marks on animal bones show they butchered carcasses, The types of stone tools they made were suited for processing both plants and animals, and microscopic wear patterns on their teeth tell a story of a varied diet. The remains found at their campsites confirm this. So, the key thing to remember is that when fire enters the picture, it doesn't necessarily change the ingredients on the menu. It changes what those ingredients become. So, why is cooking such a big deal? Modern nutritional science and biology give us a clear answer. Cooked food provides more usable energy. Think about it. Cooking softens tough meat, making it easier to chew and digest. It breaks down the rigid cell walls in plants, releasing more nutrients. It also has the huge advantage of killing harmful bacteria and pathogens. These are well-documented facts. The big question for archaeologists, though, is, did Homo erectus actually use fire for this purpose? This is where the detective work really begins. Let's look at the evidence. At incredible sites like Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, archaeologists have found burned bone fragments in layers of earth dating back around 1 million years. By analyzing these fragments, scientists can see heat signatures that suggest they were burned in a controlled fire, not just a random wildfire. This is a crucial piece of the puzzle. It tells us that food and fire were in the same place at the same time in the lives of these early humans. This is a big but doesn't prove they were deliberately cooking. The bones could have been tossed into a fire after being eaten, or they could have been burned by accident. Another important site is Gesher Banat Yaakov in Israel, dating back nearly 800,000 years. Here, researchers found an amazing collection of evidence: charred seeds and fruits, burnt flint tools, and clear repeated traces of fire in specific locations. Some scholars look at this and see strong signs of food processing with fire. They argue that this looks like a hearth, a prehistoric kitchen. Others, however, remain more cautious. They point out that even if food was getting burned, it doesn't confirm routine, intentional cooking. The evidence is incredibly suggestive, but it's not a smoking gun. So, what does this all mean? It means Homo erectus was using fire frequently enough that food items were regularly getting burned at their living sites. That's a huge step, but archaeology, as a discipline, yet definitively say that they were consistently and intentionally cooking their meals in the way we think of it today. The line between accidental charring and purposeful roasting is still blurry in the deep past. When the ground doesn't give us all the answers, we can look for clues in the body itself. The anatomy of Homo erectus is very telling. Compared to earlier hominins, they had smaller teeth and weaker chewing muscles. Fossil evidence and comparative anatomy suggest their gut was smaller relative to their body size. At the same time, their energy needs were much higher. They had larger brains to fuel and were capable of long-distance walking and running. These biological traits all point to a diet that included softer, more calorie-dense foods. Cooking would have been the perfect solution to meet these demands. It would have made food easier to eat and provided that extra energy boost. But again, biology alone can't prove behavior. It only tells us what would have been beneficial for them. This idea has led to what's known as the cooking hypothesis. It was most famously proposed by paleoanthropologist Richard Wrangham. The hypothesis suggests that the advent of cooking is what allowed for the rapid expansion of the human brain. By outsourcing some of the digestive process to fire, our ancestors could afford to have a smaller gut and divert that saved energy to a larger, more complex brain. It's a powerful and influential idea, but it remains heavily debated in the scientific community. The simple reason is that no single archaeological site from the time of early Homo erectus has produced that undeniable proof of routine cooking. Now, let's take a moment and just picture the scene. Let your mind drift back. Imagine a small fire burning low in a sheltered spot, maybe at the mouth of a cave or under a rocky overhang. Around the fire lie animal bones, some of them cracked open to get at the rich marrow inside. A few scattered plant fragments are mixed in with the soil, and some of them are lightly charred. Everything in this picture is supported by real evidence found in multiple regions across Africa and Asia. We haven't added anything that isn't backed by archaeology. Now, let's ask the questions that we can't yet answer. Did they place a piece of meat directly into the flames to cook it? We simply don't know. Did they place tough roots or tubers at the edge of the fire to warm them and make them softer? It's possible, even likely, but we have no definitive proof. Did they understand that fire made their food safer to eat or easier to chew? There's no direct evidence of their intentions, only the burned remains they left behind for us to find 1,000,000 years later. What is clear, though, is that fire and food were becoming more and more intertwined. This is the crucial takeaway. Even simple, accidental contact with a flame can transform food. Meat becomes softer. Marrow loosens inside the bone. Some plant toxins are reduced. Bacteria die. These are just the physical effects of heat. You don't need to be a gourmet chef to get these benefits. You just need proximity. Let's imagine the end of a long day. A group of Homo erectus is gathered near a fire they might have carefully carried as embers from a natural source they found earlier. A piece of leftover meat from a hunt rests near the glowing coals, slowly drying and warming. A few roots, gathered from a nearby riverbank, lie close to the heat. Someone takes a stone tool and cracks open a bone. The sharp sound echoes softly in the quiet of the prehistoric night. This scene is gentle and it's honest. It stays within the limits of what the archaeological record can truly support. As we think about this, it's important to hold onto a simple truth. Homo erectus did untransform their world with one single, dramatic invention. Their diet, their behavior, their very biology shifted slowly, shaped by opportunity and the environment around them. Fire provided warmth and protection from predators long before it became a kitchen tool. And in the process, it sometimes burned their food. Whether this led to full-blown cooking is a question that scientists are still studying, layer by layer, cave by cave. The story of Homo erectus and fire isn't one of sharp, sudden leaps forward. It's a story of steady, gradual adaptation. It's a story told step by step, meal by meal, and ember by ember. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into our deep past. If you found this fascinating, please consider liking the video and subscribing for more explorations into the story of us. Tonight, let's step away from the grand narratives of human evolution. Forget the dramatic discoveries and epic migrations for a moment. Instead, let's slow down and tune into the quiet, everyday rhythm of Homo erectus. We're going to explore a day in their life, from sunrise to sunset. And everything we discuss will be grounded in what archaeology, anthropology, and paleo-environmental studies can support. When we reach the limits of our knowledge, I'll be clear about it. Our day begins with the sunrise. In the open landscapes where Homo erectus lived, The transition from night to day is swift and powerful. As the first light spills across the savanna or through a sparse woodland, the air warms and the world awakens. Animals begin to stir, their calls echoing in the crisp morning air. For our early human ancestors, this was the signal the workday was about to begin. Their primary task was finding food. Now, this isn't just a guess. The way we find stone tools, butchered animal bones, and other signs of activity scattered across ancient sites strongly suggests that Homo erectus, like modern hunter-gatherers, used the daylight hours for their most crucial tasks. We can't say they had a rigid 9-to-5 schedule, of course, but the evidence points to a life where daylight was a precious resource, one they used productively. Their day almost always started near water. Look at the most famous Homo erectus sites around the world: Kubi Fora in Kenya, Dimansi in Georgia, the Niwan Basin in China. What do they have in common? They are all situated near ancient rivers, lakes, or wetlands. This makes perfect sense. Water sources were a one-stop shop. They offered fresh water to drink, attracted game animals, supported edible plants, and often provided the right kind of stone for making tools. Archaeologists find piles of stone debris, leftovers from toolmaking, right by these water sources. This tells us these weren't just quick stops for a drink. They were hubs of activity, places Homo erectus returned to again and again, grounding their daily lives in practical, predictable locations. Let's picture the tools they used. Homo erectus was a master of the Acheulean hand axe. These teardrop-shaped tools, along with sharp flakes and scrapers, were the Swiss Army knives of their time. They weren't decorative objects. They were practical extensions of the hand. The hand axe is found across Africa, Europe, and parts of Asia, a testament to its incredible versatility. It could be used to butcher a carcass, crack open bones, to get at the nutritious marrow, chop wood, or dig for roots. When scientists examine the wear patterns on these ancient tools, they see signs of multiple uses. This tells us their days were filled with a variety of hands-on tasks, preparing food, sharpening a stick, maybe even processing hides, although the use of hides is something we can't confirm for sure. Every task required the right tool, and they made them on the spot. As the sun climbs higher, the heat intensifies. In many of the environments they called home, midday could be brutally hot. So, what did they do? Researchers believe that the body plan of Homo erectus, with their long limbs and an inferred ability to sweat, efficiently made them well-suited for activity in the heat. They could stay active longer than many other animals. However, it's very likely that they still slowed down during the hottest part of the day. Conserving energy is a key survival strategy for any creature. While we don't have a fossilized siesta to prove it, the combination of environmental pressures and basic biology makes a midday rest a very reasonable and cautious interpretation. But make no mistake, a huge part of their day was spent on their feet, walking. Lots and lots of walking. They were tracking animals, scouting for new sources of quality stone for their tools, and moving between different resource patches. The fossil sites we find are spread far and wide. This isn't because they were restless nomads constantly on the move. It's more that over thousands of years, landscapes change, sediments bury old camps, and we only find the lucky few that were preserved. Still, their presence across 3 continents shows us that, over generations, they were capable of incredible long-distance mobility, A day's journey might not have been epic, but the accumulated steps of countless days carried them across the world. Now, let your mind settle into the evening. As the sun begins to set, the light softens and the temperature drops. Interestingly, this time of day is often better documented in the archaeological record than the afternoon. And the reason for that is one of the most important technologies in human history: fire. Not every Homo erectus site has evidence of fire, and its controlled use was likely a skill that was gained, and perhaps even lost, over Ngehove long history. But where we do find it, the evidence is compelling. We find localized patches of burned bone, pockets of ash, and charred plant remains. These traces are often found in areas that look like campsites, suggesting that evenings, when fire was available, were moments for gathering. Try to picture it. A small group of early humans, maybe a family, is gathered around a small, crackling fire. The light flickers across their faces, pushing back the deep darkness of the prehistoric night. Nearby, on the ground, lie the stone flakes left over from making tools earlier in the day. The remains of a meal, animal bones with clear-cut marks from their stone tools, are scattered in the dirt. This isn't a scene from a fantasy novel. This is exactly the kind of snapshot that archaeologists piece together from the clues left behind in the earth. The firelight created a bubble of warmth, light, and relative safety. Night fell quickly in their world. Without fire, all activity would have ceased with the last light. With fire, the day was extended just a little. It offered protection from nocturnal predators and provided warmth against the cold. Now, we have to be careful here. We have no evidence of complex rituals, no cave paintings, no signs of the kind of elaborate storytelling we associate with later humans. These are possibilities, of course, but they remain purely in the realm of speculation. What we can say for certain is that fire fundamentally changed the dynamic of the night, transforming it from a time of pure vulnerability to a time of social cohesion and security. And then, finally, sleep. This is where our archaeological window becomes almost completely opaque. We don't know how Homo erectus slept. Did they huddle together for warmth? Did they sleep in designated shelters? We have no way of knowing how long they slept or what dreams were like. The act of sleeping leaves no trace in the fossil record. However, the locations of their sites, often in caves or near natural rock shelters, suggest a common-sense approach. They rested where they could find the best protection from the wind, the rain, and the things that go bump in the prehistoric night. So, as we reflect on their day, we see it wasn't governed by a clock or a schedule. It was shaped by necessity. Daylight dictated activity. The weather dictated movement. The search for food dictated their effort. And fire, when they had it, shaped the boundary between day and night. Their daily rhythm was one of quiet repetition, a steady cadence of survival, waking with the sun, walking long distances, carefully shaping a stone into a useful tool, working together to process a carcass, gathering plants, and settling by a fire as darkness fell. As you get ready for rest in our modern world, hold on to this simple, grounded truth. The epic, million-year-long story of Homo erectus isn't built on a few dramatic events. It's built on the accumulated weight of countless ordinary days, just like the one we've walked through. This slow, steady, and resilient rhythm is what carried them across continents and allowed them to thrive for an unimaginable length of time. Their days were, on the surface, simple, but they were deeply, profoundly tuned to the landscapes they inhabited. And in that simplicity, there is a kind of power and even a kind of peace. A world driven by the fundamental forces of daylight, firelight, and the steady, persistent beat of life. Thanks for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this interesting, consider liking and subscribing for more explorations into our deep past.